Just let me introduce Joseph Hathcott. So I met Joseph through Miodrag in New York. So last year, pretty much at the same time, or maybe 1 week before, basically, we were with Miodrag in Parsons, right? And Joseph made a quite in-depth tour with us. We walked quite a lot, but you would do the same with me, as you know. And through Queens and basically Diversity Plaza and Corona Plaza, these two projects that are created with this Plaza program. But also from there, because if you go from the metro a little bit more further, you see also there are some other areas. It's actually quite a rich area in terms of urban history and different kind of layers, but also communities living there. So we thought it would be amazing to invite Joseph again. And I think also because today we are basically, and in this entire workshop, of course, thinking about how can we make sense remotely of places where we not can be. And one is basically to be on Zoom, invite an urban scholar and somebody who's also a neighbor there, right? Who's living there also, and who probably combines a perspective in this presentation, I assume, something that is basically related to urban studies, urban history, maybe to some part. No, I think that your work is also very much linked to urban history. As one, as you also heard from Seta, that is of course one of the important perspectives that we can have. And in a remote study, I think these are always, I think, also a good way of learning about places. So without further ado, I would say, Joseph, sorry so much for starting a little bit later, but I hope that you also enjoyed maybe listening to some, maybe you might know Joseph Seta's work anyway, but I hope that's okay for you. And without further ado, you can start your talk. At the moment, I cannot hear you. I can see you, but I cannot hear you. You are not muted. So maybe there is something with your audio setting or your microphone. Still not?
Now can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it sound good or weak?
Very
sounds good. Okay. I need to share my screen. So let me do that. So desktop, PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint?
yes.
Okay, let me go to
Presentation mode.
Slideshow. Okay. So can you see the whole screen now?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I've been using Skype, not Zoom, so I'm not sure how to do all this on Zoom. So,
But it's
good to see all of you, and thanks for inviting me to talk with you. I'm going to take you on a little journey through my patch of Queens, as we say in the U.S., right? My patch, in other words, my area of Queens where I live. I'm a professor at the New School, specifically in Parsons School of Design, but I do live in Queens and am active in those communities. As Hendrik said, I do study urban history. I also do ethnographic work and also mapping and data analysis as well. So I'm going to take you through some fairly extraordinary neighborhoods, all of which grew up along the 7 train. And the 7 train is the train that goes through the middle of Queens, and it links a series of some of the most ethnically and culturally diverse neighborhoods in the United States and perhaps in the world, if you will. So I will start here. Can you all see this image? Okay, great. So you've probably already learned quite a bit about New York, right? You guys learned about New York City a lot?
Not so much, because this is basically just a 1-week workshop, but
Okay.
I think that Miodrag made a very nice presentation yesterday, more introducing Hudson Yards and the Plaza program a little bit. But
Perfect. Okay, so that helps me. So this is just a kind of suborbital image of New York City, where you can see Manhattan, the small island in the middle, the Bronx is above it, right, and then Brooklyn down at the bottom, and Queens is sort of in the middle of this image. And this also shows you the ocean at the bottom, the Hudson estuary, which is the water that goes up into Manhattan, and at the very top is Long Island Sound. Right. Is that you can see it?
maybe you
Okay.
can use if you use your cursor, we can actually see the
Oh,
cursor.
oh, you
Yeah.
can see the cursor.
Usually, yes. Let me see. Yeah, we can see.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so there's
Just
Long
in
Island
general.
Sound.
Just in general. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Um, And here are the boroughs of New York City. You guys probably know that New York City has 5 boroughs: the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Queens, right? Queens is the largest borough by far, and is the second most populous borough after Brooklyn, right? So it has about 2 million to about 2.1 million people in the borough. And where I'm going to be taking you today is in the area within this red square here. You see this area? So we'll be walking through that area of Queens. It's basically Western Queens, if you will. So we'll look through there in that area. And I'm going to take you through this series of neighborhoods that's connected by the 7 train. And the 7 train is this piece of infrastructure you see at the bottom, the yellow line, here, right, that runs along the bottom of the image. And I've marked out the 2 plazas right here. So there's Diversity Plaza in Jackson Heights and Corona Plaza in Corona. And the neighborhoods that the 7 train goes through include in many neighborhoods. These aren't all the neighborhoods, but these are the ones I'll look at today. Sunnyside, Woodside, Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, and Corona, which is actually separated into North Corona and South Corona by the 7 train. Okay, does that make sense? And you can see, just for reference, at the top, there's LaGuardia Airport and Long Island Sound, the water to the north. Okay, so that gives you a sense of what we'll be doing. Ordinarily, if you were here in New York City, we'd be walking along this route together, and I'd be showing you all around, but we'll see what we can do. It's important to remember that as early as the early 1900s, this whole area was largely rural, right? It was largely agricultural land, small villages, things like that. It had not been urbanized. And in fact, this street that you're looking at right here, this road, this dirt road, is now where the 7 train is, right? So this was taken in 1913. So as late as 1913, this was a predominantly rural landscape, right? A pastoral landscape in Queens. But it developed very rapidly in the 20th century. And the key to the development of this area was the construction of this bridge, right? This is what we call the old people in New York called the 59th Street Bridge. It's also called Queens Bridge, right? And this is the bridge that the first free bridge that connected Manhattan to the borough of Queens, right? And so this opened up Queens to very rapid development. The bridge was finished in 1909. And into 1910, 11, 12, they began building the 7 train. And I'll talk a little bit about that here. So the 7 train, you can see an image of it right here. This really was one of the original kind of transit-oriented development propositions, as you can see, right? This train, this enormous and expensive piece of infrastructure is essentially going through very sparsely populated farmland. And the whole idea is that this train is going to basically suck people out of Manhattan into the borough of Queens. It's basically a pressure valve release for overcrowded Manhattan. So people from Manhattan will come out here to find lower cost housing, right? And the whole question is, at the time, what will that housing look like? And so there were a lot of different experiments with housing, which is what makes Queens actually quite interesting as a place. It was kind of this open canvas for a lot of different people to think about what housing might look like in a growing metropolitan region like New York, right? So this is the 7 train as it goes through Sunnyside and Woodside. So even by World War I, which is when this picture was taken, this is Jackson Heights, it was still relatively agricultural. There were lots of gardens, things like that, but you can see in the background the beginning of some apartment and larger scale development, right? So these are the kind of first forays into new housing construction in the area. Some of it quite low scale, but some of it more medium scale housing, as you see here with the larger apartment buildings. So this is Jackson Heights, I think right around 1917, 1918, during World War I. So Jackson Heights is an important neighborhood in the history of the US, and this is actually where I live. And it's important because it was the first garden apartment community, the first application of the Garden City movement in the United States. So the promise, of course, was ideal city life, right? What they thought would be the normal way of living, as you can see here, which is a very strange concept, obviously, to us today. But the idea would be that these would be medium scale apartment buildings around lots of green space, right? And I'll show you what that would have looked like here. So sorry, I apologize for the low quality of this image, but I can't get a better one. So these are the first garden apartments that you can see here. They're basically block perimeter plans where the apartments are built around a central courtyard, as you can see. So Jackson Heights was filled with these kinds of developments. There were about 22 of them overall. Most of them were actually built as cooperatives, right? They were housing cooperatives, and they still are today. In fact, the place I live is a cooperative rather than a rental apartments. People actually own the apartments cooperatively. This gives you a kind of example of what the architects were thinking in terms of a transformation in land use, right? So on the left, you see a typical block in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, right? This very jumbled set of properties, these very tight parcel geographies, which is what you get with the kind of rampant laissez-faire capitalism, right? The idea in Jackson Heights is you would have these orderly block forms. This is actually on the right, the apartment complex that I live in, which is called Donnelly Gardens Cooperative. And this is the kind of typical Jackson Heights format with the block perimeter buildings and the central courtyard gardens. And these were medium scale, meaning that hundreds, even thousands of people would live in these various cooperatives. And this, again, was all made possible because of the 7 train coming through. Which provided the people with mobility options to live out here but work in Manhattan. Here's Cambridge Court, which is one of the early garden apartments. Very much focused on a model that comes out of places like Germany and the Netherlands in the 1910s and 20s, right? They actually went to Germany and Netherlands to study housing there. Here's some of the commercial developments in Jackson Heights in 1920s. Here's Donnelly Gardens. This is actually where I live. This is part of the garden you can see here. So that's basically the form that was common in Jackson Heights. Sunnyside is another garden community, a garden city community, that developed actually not on the apartment scale, but on the owner-occupied housing scale, like the low scale of individual housing, right? So these are townhouses occupied by individual families, but instead of being row houses along the street, they're organized perpendicular to the street with a lot of garden space in between. So you can see, again, this is another experiment in thinking about how you will house people in fairly large densities as the metropolitan periphery expands. Clarence Stein and Henry Wright designed this complex, 2 very famous architects, and actually Lewis Mumford, the great urbanist, lived here in this complex. Now, Jackson Heights, you can see on the left here with all the large block perimeter co-op buildings that were built. You can see it's mid-range, mid-scale. Here's Junction Boulevard going diagonally across the screen, top to bottom, and here's the 7 train along the bottom of the image, going from left to right. In other words, east to west, right? Over here on the right is Corona. Now, Corona is a very different kind of neighborhood. As you can see, hopefully you can see from this image, it's a much lower scale community and much denser. It was built at much greater density in terms of the block forms and the houses. They were really packed together in Corona. I'll show you some examples. But all these neighborhoods were essentially finished by around the 1940s, 1950s. They had been filled in, and they had become relatively diverse neighborhoods by World War II, mostly with what we would call white ethnic groups, Germans, Polish people, an increasing number of Jewish refugees from Germany and Russia, and other groups. And there were other groups coming in like Greeks, and Cubans, actually. So it was becoming more diverse by World War I and World War II, but still largely a white ethnic, white kind of European descent community. Here's some photos from the 60s of Jackson Heights and Corona. All that changed, though, with the passage of the 1965 Immigration Reform Act. After 1965, the United States let in a very large number of immigrants, and it really changed our ethnic composition and politics and a whole range of things about our society very quickly. And in New York City, of course, became more and more diverse, and the kind of heart of that diversity really was Queens. Queens is where a lot of the immigrant groups went, because the borough was the most affordable, right? It was, you could get housing in Queens much easier. You could get property much easier. You could start a business in Queens much more readily with much less money. And so a lot of immigrant groups settled here to establish businesses, establish their homes, and then begin bringing family members over in chain migrations. And so what I'll do now, since I've shown you the kind of general outlines of the neighborhoods, I'll take you through some of these areas and let you see what they look like. Is that okay, Hendrik? Okay, so what you're looking at now is Elmhurst, just to the south of the 7 train. We're actually quite close to the 7 train here. This is a park in Elmhurst, and as you can see, a large percentage of the population in Elmhurst is composed of people from East Asia and to some extent South Asia. A large number of people actually from Hong Kong and Taiwan actually live in Elmhurst, but also an increasing number of people from Fujian province live there as well. So here is a preschool in Elmhurst, as you can see. This is a photo I took in the Elmhurst Library. So I cannot read this writing, but I think a lot of you might be able to read these Chinese romance novel titles. So this is the literature that is stocked in the Elmhurst Library to cater to the very diverse customer base, client base there. This is a kind of typical commercial block in Elmhurst, not far from the 7 train. This is a photograph that I took at an Indonesian festival. So there is an increasing number of people in Elmhurst also from Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia. And so this is a monthly Indonesian festival that happens through the summer. Very fun environment. It's held in a church, and there's food and music and all sorts of things. Here is Gita Temple. This is a Hindu temple in Elmhurst that caters to the Hindu community in both Jackson Heights and Elmhurst. It's the Ahmedabad Gujarat temple. Here's a typical street scene in Elmhurst. This is just about half a block from the 7 train. So you're getting to see what these neighborhoods around the 7 train really look like. Now we're shifting over to Jackson Heights, which is just north of the 7 train. And this photograph was actually taken about a block north of the 7 train. And this is what some people call Little India in Jackson Heights. Primarily made up, this part of Jackson Heights made up of people from Bangladesh, but also from the Bengal areas of India. So both Bangladeshi nationals, but also Indian nationals who are Bengali descent, and then also Gujaratis and Punjabis as well. So it's a mixed South Asian community here. Jackson Heights also has a very large Central and South American community, largely comprised of people from Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, Ecuador, Honduras, and so forth. So it is the most diverse neighborhood in Queens, in fact. So here are some images from Jackson Heights, some of the commercial establishments that you can see here with all kinds of services for immigrant communities. And this is just steps away from the 7 train. This Western Union obviously is very important because Jackson Heights, like other immigrant neighborhoods, is very tied into the remittance economy. So people send large amounts of money home every week, every month to families in home countries for support and other things. Here's more businesses. There's, you can see here the Everest Telecom. It's a reference to Mount Everest, obviously. There's an increasing number of people in Jackson Heights from Nepal and Tibet. That's the actually most recent immigrant group that we're seeing coming in. So Jackson Heights has kind of become their new home. Here's just a typical street scene in Jackson Heights. Jackson Heights is also kind of the center of the Latino, lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transsexual community and transgender community. So it's a very important kind of center for pride, for LGBT pride. There's also a lot of clubs in the neighborhood that cater to the transgender community, and particularly to Latino transgender people, and also to Thai, Filipino, and Indonesian transgender people. So it's a place where there's a lot of multi-ethnic mixing within the LGBT community. Here's another street scene in Jackson Heights. This is close to where I live, in fact. This is an Indian Indian community festival in Jackson Heights on a hot summer day. This is on the border of Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, right under the 7 train. You can see the steps that actually lead up to the 7 train there, right? And now we're at Junction Boulevard, and so we're going to cross Junction Boulevard and go from Jackson Heights into Corona, right? And remember, Corona is where the neighborhood starts to get lower scale. It steps down dramatically from high-rise or mid-rise buildings to 1, 2, and 3-story commercial buildings and houses. Here, as you see here. So this is on one of the main streets of Corona, 37th Avenue. Here's a park in Corona. This is Park of the Americas. So this is a really interesting park where people gather, most of whom speak Spanish, but come from different countries. So there's Mexican Americans, Mexican immigrants, Colombians, Hondurans, Ecuadorians, Peruvians, but they all have in common the Spanish language. And so they're able to meet each other in these parks in Corona and have conversations. It's a typical scene in Corona, street seller, vendor. There's a evangelical church in Corona. A Catholic iconography store in Corona, very important. Most of the population is Catholic, although there are more and more evangelicals coming into the neighborhood, as you can see, mostly from Mexico. Here's Roosevelt Avenue, and you can see the 7 train here in the background above. So these are the stanchions and supports of the 7 train. And so a lot of the life goes on underneath the 7 train on the streets. And the constant kind of movement of the 7 train is a kind of sonic regulator of the neighborhood. It's that kind of sound that continues in a routine way, and it becomes the kind of envelope that people live their lives in. Very important sound for us. Here's a church in Corona after Sunday Mass. Here's, we're looking towards Corona Plaza here, as you can see in the background, but we're under the 7 train, looking south towards the plaza. And here, in fact, is Corona Plaza. So I think you will be looking at the Plaza program, Hendrik, is that correct? So this is Corona Plaza, and as you probably know already, it was created by a partnership with the Department of the Streets Department or Department of Transportation, and a set of nonprofit and NGO actors. So it's a very kind of complex mix. You'll learn more about it, of course, as you get into it, but I could answer any questions you may have about the program. And then you can see in the behind the plaza, going across the screen from left to right, this is the 7 train here in the Corona 103rd Avenue station right there by the plaza. So this plaza has become a really important space in the community, and it's become very active and very well used in just the short time that it's existed. So that's the Corona Plaza, and then this is the Diversity Plaza in Jackson Heights. So a similar kind of setup where a street was vacated and turned into a pedestrian zone, and then these kind of tables put out, and this area transformed into pedestrian use only. So this is Diversity Plaza here. And I believe that is the last image I have, yeah. So I hope I didn't take up too much time. I know you guys are running behind, so I wanted to go quickly, but yeah, so questions or anything? Yeah.
So thanks so much for Joseph's presentation, and I still because we can also reflect about those different ways how we use basically now online, right? Joseph sits in the evening basically in his living room in, I assume, in actually in Jackson Heights in Queens. And we heard basically, I would say yesterday, presentations, let's say on, I would say maybe Miodrag, how would we call it, like critical urban studies, right? Maybe. So it has a historical component, but also connected with also a lot of kind of social, economic analysis and so on. Then we had basically a slightly more kind of activist approach, maybe yesterday by Luisa, who's basically promoting particular views on public space. Then we had with Manfredo basically a presentation using social media, and through social media look at particular places in Auckland, and a little bit around that, of course, also introducing Auckland, some aspects of the urban form. So then we have heard about anthropology and the study of anthropology, and how that could be potentially also be used for the study, even also remotely. And now today, I think we get basically a presentation relating, I would say, urban history, right? But also with urban experience. So I'm also very glad that you also included even the sound, right? Because kind of filling in some of those elements, and we could probably even fill in a little bit on the temperature there. I remember when we went there last year, it was 40 degrees.
Very hot, yeah.
It was, I think I really got a kind of heat stroke. I really, I passed out in the restaurant almost, right? And then of course in the winter it's quite cold in New York. We also saw, because for our students, Shamshipo is seen as a kind of more diverse area. There are some Southeast Asians and so on, but that might be maybe 5–10% of the population, right? you see, if you talk about New York and different communities, it's very difficult to say what is the majority culture and so on in Queens, right? Because I mean,
There actually is no majority culture in
no,
Queens. Yeah,
exactly,
it's a plurality condition. Yeah,
and it is basically constantly also transforming, as you
right.
also basically said, with each move, no? And also enriching through that,
Yeah.
or overlaying, right?
The last census where it was the last United States census where it was predominantly white was 1950. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So basically, if they would search for the demographics and so on, they would basically look at the American census. I guess that there is a census that they can find and so on.
Yeah, I can actually send you guys links to New York City .gov and other databases that have plenty of information on demographics. You can even get demographics down to the census tract level, so you can get very detailed information. I can send that to you.
I think that don't do too much work with it, but maybe
No, no, of course, it's
two
easy.
links
No.
would be amazing, because we gave students this for Hong Kong, and also Miodrag also already contributed a lot, but I think you and him, you're also very busy with other things. So maybe before we open up for students' question, I have another question to you now, because we saw basically in Miodrag's presentation and that Queens and particularly, of course, the area around Corona Plaza was basically the epicenter of the pandemic, right? So
Yeah.
how did you, as both as a professional urban scholar, but also as somebody kind of living in the area, how did you survive the last 2-3 months there? And any reflections on that very particular time?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, it was heartbreaking to see this community under the condition of pandemic, especially a community that is so vital and vibrant and living, and people love to live out in the streets, and there's so much activity constantly, and then to see all that sort of retreat. To see people go out of public space back into their private domains was difficult, and of course, obviously, the suffering that came to families was also very difficult and tragic. And of course, the pandemic hit working class people and immigrant communities much harder than other communities. And a lot of the immigrants who live in these neighborhoods, they work in industries that it's very difficult for them to not work, because first, they don't have good health insurance, they don't have access to social welfare programs and things like that, but also they work in food delivery and other kinds of industries where they're quite vital and necessary, but of course they're not getting paid as if they're vital and necessary. So that's been part of the response for a lot of us in these communities, has been to really try to advocate for much better treatment, higher wages, recognition by the city of people who are undocumented so they can get health care, all those sorts of things. So there's been a lot of social churning that has also come up with the pandemic. Yeah.
How was it, just kind of for somebody like you personally? Did you go out much in that time, or you just basically locked in your place? Do you use?
Yeah.
Can you use the line number 7? Do you use that to go to Parsons, or are you teaching online?
Yeah.
What's the
So,
life at the moment?
I went, things shut down in New York pretty severely in the middle of March. And so for 1 month, we barely left our apartment. So from mid-March to mid-April, we almost went nowhere, my wife and I. And of course, school was shut down, and we were teaching online. We were teaching remotely. So all my courses shifted online. So I actually have not been on public transportation since mid-March, which is very unusual, very, very unusual, because we, of course, use it all the time, right? Only in the last month, May into June, have we started to go out bit by bit, maybe even going a little further, but mostly either walking, or sometimes we'll actually get in our car and drive somewhere. But that's usually it's just walking around. Our community, the New York City has a street program where they're closing off streets, and Jackson Heights and Corona have one of those streets. It's 34th Avenue, and that's right by our cooperative. And so it's a really nice to have that street blocked off from traffic, and it's very well used by people. So we're just trying to get out, but keep our distance, you know.
What is the name of that street? Because that would be also an important.
It's called 34th Avenue, and I will send you a link to a video about it and some other information.
Yeah, because I think that's something they need to study, and I'm also very curious. How is it at the moment, the situation, or even also in the weeks before, getting food? Basically, it's all over delivery, or people go to the supermarket and buy there.
So the supermarkets have basically been closed for retail. That is for people coming to the supermarket. They deliver. And it's a very big operation. They have people who do the shopping, and they consolidate the food into boxes, and then delivery people bring it to your home. That's good because it cuts down the number of people concentrating in the supermarkets, which are actually places that don't have good air circulation and are probably places of transmission, viral transmission. So they really wanted to clamp down on the supermarkets. The farmers markets are actually open again, but they're now spread out much further. So we have a farmers market right by our co-op, and so we can go there every Sunday if we want to get, you know, vegetables or fish or other things. But yeah, it's mostly delivery. Yeah. Although we do go out to get things too, but you have to be careful. Obviously, you have to be careful.
Are people still? Are any restaurants open at the moment?
No.
Only for delivery.
Only for delivery, yeah. But no, you can't eat in restaurants now. No. They're thinking about late June opening them, but not now.
And local, any shops or other things, street shops, they're all closed more or less?
Most of them are closed. Some of the like household shops that sell household goods can be open, but a lot of times they have blocked off the entrance, and you go to the entrance and tell them what you want, and they go back and get it for you and bring it up. So it's actually an interesting model of shopping.
Sorry that I asked so many questions. One more, like I remember we went, I think, close to your house into one kind of very nice neighborhood park. It's a bit more, slightly more middle class, I would say. Relatively new park that you showed us. Right. Are those with places for children to play and so on? Are those closed or open?
So they were closed for a month, and in mid to late May, they opened back up. So parks are open, but playgrounds are closed, right? So they make a distinction between those two kinds of spaces. Yeah, so the park you're talking about is Traverse Park, and it's middle class, but also working class. There's a real mix of middle class and working class people in this area, who use that park for sure.
So that means in terms of public space use, where would people use the street probably to a certain extent, right?
The street, and that's why the closing streets program has been so important. But we also have a big park. We have Flushing Meadows Park, which is not too far. I mean, we could walk there, and many people do, and it's very big. So you can go there. It's not closed. They couldn't close it. They couldn't possibly close it anyway.
Yeah. So Flushing Meadows is also where the famous tennis and also I think the Queen's Museum, is it also in the same?
Yeah, the Queen's Museum building, which actually used to be the United Nations. That was the UN building until they built the new one in Manhattan. And 2 World's Fairs were held there as well. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's also interesting because you have the history of the World Fairs, but also you have basically a district that is basically like a representation of the world. And I saw that in a way because you started with this image of the world at the beginning, right?
Right.
Of representation, which is still there, I believe, in the park, right?
It's in the park. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And which is basically a history of globalization, but
Right.
in terms of those events, but also the use. Let me see if I. But the train is operating, right?
It is operating because essential workers have to be able to get to work. So all public transit has been operating throughout the crisis. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lot of kind of squeezing out information from you, but because you're so knowledgeable,
That's fine, of course.
it's rare that you see. Of course, usually you would never see also how somebody lives in Jacksonville, right? But at the moment, we see basically. I can open
This is my office, actually, the office.
Yeah, sorry for being, but it's actually an interesting. I'm just mentioning this not so much because of Joseph, but also because there is an aspect in terms of field studies and insights into homes. I listened to Stanford University. The anthropology department has a series. Seta told me many kind of video clips about now remote ethnography. I can only recommend also for the students.
Cool.
And one of those points is that it's actually sometimes easier in these moments to get a slightly more intimate relationship to people once you are kind of establishing like this kind of Zoom contact, right? Because it's a bit different. People talk from home. I mean, usually I don't have this background here, right? And through that, probably we behave also a little bit different.
I've also found that actually with some of my students, and I'd be interested to hear what all of you have to say as students, but I have students who are very shy in the classroom with everybody, but in Zoom, they really open up, right? Because they feel less vulnerable, and they feel like they can just turn it off if anything goes wrong, right? Whereas in classroom, there's nowhere to hide, you know. So it's interesting. Some of my shy students have actually come out, you know, and been great, you know. So it's interesting.
How
really interesting.
Maybe we can ask our students, Terry or Chen, do you see any difference in this kind of online communication? I mean, for us, of course, the group of students from Hong Kong, they now I think they have met me basically for almost a year now, right? So it maybe it's difficult to say is it's just a medium or not, because it's a kind of you get used to people in a way a little bit, right? But I think in general, what do you think from your student side to Joseph's comment? Do you think it's a bit kind of easier to communicate online to talk?
For me, I think it's maybe getting harder to communicate. I don't know why, but sometimes when we use Zoom to have lecture, I found our classmates are less activate. Maybe
like that.
yeah. Maybe for us, last semester we have used online teaching. So maybe for us Hong Kong students, we spent so long time on the internet. So maybe we prefer face-to-face to communicate. It's my personal thinking. I don't know about my classmates.
Yeah. Yes, from my perspective, I think it's really unlucky for us to sharing the unique experience in this year. So maybe we will share a lot of memories in this period in the future. So I think yeah, it will be helpful for our relationship.
But it's a bit sad, right? How is it for the Auckland team? I think that there are also, I don't know if Bianca or Xiaodong, are you around? How do you see it? How's your experience? I don't know if you're at the moment online, or I don't want to put you on the
I
spot.
might have put them to sleep.
No, actually, I wanted to say that because this is this workshop also we use as a whole team, I think also as a reflection about teaching methods, right? How do we teach in this period? No, because usually one of our kind of feature program is always we go in summer on trips, right? And of course we all believe as you and so for urban studies. I think you're teaching usually in Paris, right? Also.
I was, yeah.
So to take students into a different environment, learn about a different culture and so on, right? So and of course we know we cannot compete with the real thing, but there are elements of this kind of online communication that are also not too bad, actually, right? So because basically now, usually without Zoom, we couldn't have Joseph here from basically an area that we have the idea to study on the other part of the world, and have some original tone of a resident, seeing him living in that particular neighborhood that we have heard of, also a bit kind of sensationalist in a way, as a kind of epicenter of the coronavirus. And usually if you look at the statistics and you see the press photos, you see also, oh, wait a minute, we cannot even walk in there, and okay, there's all these immigrants and so on. And here comes a teacher sitting in this space, looking relatively comfortable. We can build a kind of trustworthy relationship. The other thing is because I remember when we walked through, and I know those walks through, not because you did it, but I do the same thing, is of course, if you have a group of 15 people, you walk through an area, and you see basically one time layer, right? But
That's right.
in this case, because particularly I think also your approach, or I quite close to that also, I think is also to look at the historical layers, right? I think it's, and I must say, even though I don't want to miss my personal experience in that space, because I really the smells, and also this participatory aspect. In some areas, maybe you might also, if you're not used to it, maybe you might also feel like, am I in the right place? Because I mean, New York can be also violent and so on. You don't know really, but maybe as an outsider, right? Of course, you grew up there, that's how, so you know the situation, right? And of course, walking with you, of course, we felt very safe and so on. And it is, I think, also quite safe.
It's actually one of the safest cities in the United States, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah.
It is.
Yeah, but I think that even like our students might also have the same feeling about Chamshupo, and Hong Kong is probably one of the safest cities that I know. Even maybe under the protests, I think under the entire protest, I think 2 people died or something, right? So my wife was living in Baltimore, and basically you had like every day somebody or 1 or 2 people shot, right? So but Baltimore has also good and bad side anyway, but just to say, I must say that because I can compare basically the 2 experience of walking around with you through the area, and as I said, I don't want to miss that experience. It was amazing, that's why we ask you again. But I also must say that having the opportunity, looking at my screen, sitting at home, very comfortable, and seeing in a high quality those different historical photos, handpicked by a historian, or it's no, like very specifically, that we can see, okay, this is how this train was built, this is how the landscape was. It adds another layer, right? So I'm not saying this. It's not about kind of to advertisement, but more like it's a reflection for all of us. Because I think you are master students, right? Maybe you might teach in a year from now. Maybe some of you might teach somewhere, right? Or and of course we are always as practitioners also. You always have sites that are not, where you often cannot go, or even if it's the same city, you might not always go. Even now, many of them have study sites in Hong Kong, but they don't, even without pandemic, they might not always go, because it's a bit kind of still the historical method and good visual material and a narrative, right? I think it's still a very powerful means to introduce, I think, a
Yeah,
place.
I agree. I agree.
So fantastic. I just, because I basically occupy the whole space with my talking, I just kind of, because I want to tease out at least like as much as we can in a very short time. But students, you will have the exercise, right? You need to study Queens, right? And Corona Plaza during, before the pandemic and during the pandemic and looking forward. Is there anything now you have basically a great urban scholar and a resident, right? Anything you want to ask?
Yes. Since the last conference, I tried to search some information like the live camera to show. I tried to figure out okay, what kind of the picture or what kind of the videos can show the current situation, especially in New York. But I may not succeed. So if you can help us, yeah, because you know we are in Hong Kong, so maybe we are quite more familiar with the Central and the Shui Pole, and we have the friends who live there and can provide some the real photos for us. Yes, so if you can help to deal with some problem in New York. Yeah.
One of the things I would say is that you can you may not find any videos from the immediate situation the last weeks or something, but there are a lot of videos on YouTube of these neighborhoods. I mean, hundreds of videos on Jackson Heights, Corona, things like that. And you can click on them and walk down the street. There's many good ones. I've used them in my classrooms before, and I used them when I was in Paris to show students in Paris what it was like in Queens. So, you know, I mean, there's actually a lot online that you can look at on YouTube specifically.
Yeah, maybe you, I mean, one thing, maybe you are searching for the kind of installed webcams on a particular place. I'm not sure, maybe there might be on for Corona Plaza, maybe, but for others, maybe also for privacy reasons, they might not be always on or something.
Well, do you know anyone who can hack into security cameras? That would work, because they're definitely security cameras.
Police or that's of course is possible, like personal agents, right? But the other point is, I think what Joseph is saying, like, it's more the question, like, how do you search, right? Because maybe if you're not searching only for webcam, but basically YouTube and anything with Queens or Elmhurst and Corona, maybe it's also the way how you use the local names or street names. I remember an urban studies student of mine wanted to do something on Cape Town in South Africa, but from Hong Kong. And even if he's there, I think to go into some of those neighborhoods alone is, if you don't know the area, there are of course areas where there might be sometimes some security risk and so on.
Right.
But then we found basically a lot of YouTubes of people basically driving through their neighborhood, but also explaining, oh yeah, you know, like that street corner, for example, oh, you always have to be careful because you can be shot there or something there, and so on. Actually, a lot of people post those kind of things, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
Quite amazing. And I think that certainly, I think in New York, I can imagine, because many people are also into love media and film and so on. And how is it with support now in this crisis, right? I believe that there, what also Miodrag was saying, that much of the support comes basically by community groups, right? You were saying you have like different, your cooperative has like something and so on. Are there like particular, like any one or two that you could think of where they could maybe start to look at something that comes to your mind?
Yeah, so there's an organization in Queens that's very important that we support a lot, called Make the Road. Make the Road, 3 words. And that's an activist organization that's very involved in immigrant rights, and particularly around economic issues, but also labor issues and things like that. So that's a really good organization to look at. And they've been, of course, very active around the pandemic and trying to support families who people are out of work, things like that. But yeah, I mean, there's actually many in Queens and in each neighborhood, and they're often very oriented towards the language groups, right? So there'll be a Hindi-speaking organization, a Spanish-speaking organization. There'll be Chinese organizations, but one might actually be Fujianese specifically. One might be specifically for Hong Kong. So it's very quite diverse. But that's the thing about the U.S. is that there's all these layers of sort of nonprofit, non-governmental organizations. I mean, of course, they can't match the capacity of the federal government. We need the federal government to do more than they are doing. But so far, that's been where most of the relief has come from. And also church organizations have been very important. Mosques, Islamic foundations, Catholic foundations, churches, temples, synagogues, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Which I think is a parallel to Hong Kong, which is also economically also very much kind of, I wouldn't say neoliberal, it was always liberal, right? Because the colonial government never, or until the 70s, didn't really invest much into social welfare. Then
right.
A little bit, but basically then you had Caritas. Later we will have basically somebody from Caritas talking about basically working with people in subdivided flats. And
wow.
So basically there will be in 2 hours from now, but you will probably be sleeping, otherwise you could listen. But another, maybe I don't know if it's my last one, but you see, we talk about snowballing, like finding, like using one interview from there, finding other pathways, right? That you heard about. Seta was mentioning snowballing, right? That sometimes you ask somebody who knows very well the neighborhood, you start somewhere, right? If you never ask, then from that person, right, you go, you get maybe 3 more names, right, or organizations, and then you go from there further, right, and then ask those again, and then you build up your information, right?
That's right.
And particularly also to get a kind of trustworthy or an entry card into those things. No? Now, one thing that is more related also to your profession, and you showed also those things. We, of course, as urban designers, and also some of them are architects, something like building typology is also interesting for one particular reason, for the Shamshipo case, in terms of the impact on the pandemic. Of course, you have a particular form, we call it the Tonglao buildings, some kind of private tenement buildings that is subdivided and so on, right? Now, what we heard, I don't know if it's true, but I think one of the reasons for the spread at the moment is not density in terms of the housing, but it's basically the crowdedness.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Where will we find building plans or images, drawings about those typologies where those conditions happen? Because I think Jacksonville, where you live, that's a bit kind of slightly more a different animal, right? You showed like some of the small buildings in Queens around Corona.
Right.
Very small.
Yeah, and in fact, that's where the biggest problem is, right? So it's not the tall buildings or even the mid-rise buildings. The real problem has been in the 2-story houses, and that's not because of the typology itself, but because of, exactly as you say, the crowding, right? Exactly. And so Corona, one of the reasons it was hit so hard by the coronavirus, irony of ironies, is because it is probably the most overcrowded neighborhood in New York City. not densest, of course, but overcrowded, which the measure in New York City is for overcrowding is over 1.51 people per room, right? That's the definition.
Did you write that down? I tease all those things out, right? You need to,
yeah.
you need to write it down. Well, we are recording it, so that's maybe
good. Yeah. Greater than or equal to 1.51 people per room.
Yeah,
is the definition of overcrowding, and
so,
Corona it meets that.
Yeah. So how many people might there be in the room? Like, is it?
I think Corona actually is over 2. So that when you think about that in terms of a spread from the mean, that is a very crowded neighborhood. Jackson Heights, I think, is much lower. I mean, it's more like closer to 1. So if you're up for 2 to 2.5, you're in a severe overcrowding range.
And just to explain, this is per room, right? So that means,
per room.
For example, if you have a little house maybe with 3 rooms inside, you might have 6 people, but those 6 people might join the same kitchen and bathroom, right?
Exactly. And what's happened to many of the houses in Corona is that they've been divided and subdivided, not unlike the Hong Kong situation, except not high rise, right? These are low rise, but a house that was built for one family originally might have 4, 5, or 6 families living in it now. Right, so it's very a precarious situation, and people do that because they have to save money, and it's a brutal real estate market, you know.
And are there people that, I'm sure there must be people that have mapped those things or draw this? What would be the best quick way to find?
I have some articles on Corona housing situation. If I can send to you, I mean, that's not a problem.
Yeah, I just, I mean, I already very happy that we can kind of tease out so many things. I don't want you have to go back and do homework and so on. But of course, we are very, very happy to see things. But and and usually they are basically physically also subdivided, or do people live or share the same room?
Right. It does depend on the house. I mean, some houses they're still the same form, and then just people are crowding in. Other houses have been sometimes illegally subdivided, top and bottom, and then back and front. And so you might have 4 apartments in a house that was supposed to just have one family originally, right? And then in those apartments, you might have 1 family, but you might have 2 families, right? And so you could end up having a lot of people in one small house, maybe up to 10 or 12 people living in a house that used to be for 1 small family, right?
And then usually 1 bathroom or 1 kitchen maybe shared, right? And
right.
And then you have those kind of conditions, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's I would not say it's on the scale of some of the Hong Kong divided housing, but I mean, it's still pretty difficult, pretty bad. Yeah.
How is the accessibility to masks, and do people in the meantime start to wear them or not really? And is it
you mean the masks for face?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, people wear them, and in fact, I mean, you're pretty much required to in New York if you're out. So I think there are exceptions. If you're jogging or running, you don't have to necessarily wear them, or if you're on your own in a park. But if you're on a street, yeah, I mean, you're supposed to wear masks.
And can you buy them? Are they very expensive? Are they available?
Yeah, they're relatively available. Not the surgical ones; those are for healthcare workers. But paper ones, or then people wear ones that are reusable, like bicycle masks, things like that. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds.
Yeah. Because I think in Hong Kong, that created a lot of anxiety for people because people went through SARS. People knew that, and it's also, I don't want to say it's cultural. I think it's cultural because people went through SARS. Because I think in the old culture, I don't think that people had masks necessarily. Well, in some of the pandemics, early pandemics, maybe yes, but but certainly after SARS, that people really started to to mask often, also for air pollution or other reasons. But but then with this culture, and also because you're one thing is the legal thing, but also how you look by your community is basically it would reflect on you very badly to go out
Right.
without a mask, but also you would
Right. Yeah.
you would feel scared also. And that for the people, because in Hong Kong, which was very different to Taiwan, where I spent like most of the weeks in the hot phase because of I just traveled there and then I stuck there in a way. And but there basically the price of masks was controlled, and it was clear that everyone has access to masks. Not many, but at least like 2 or 3 per week for everyone, no matter. That is a kind of guarantee, right? And
Right.
then we got
Right.
better and better in organizing it and so on. And particularly also they have a clear price, and it's the same SARS history and so on, right? In Hong Kong, the situation may be also interesting for Bianca and Xiaodong. In Hong Kong, at the beginning, even health, I think there was a big difficulty to get to masks, and also because before the government even forbid masks and import masks because of the protests and so on. But there was a big kind of problem of getting masks, and the government tried to buy them. It didn't work out. And I could tell longer about this, but also they refused to have any interference in the free market for masks. So they say, oh, we can, free press is one thing, but free mask, no, we cannot interfere in the mask prices, and that affected. Seems like we can ask later our colleague from social work that we will talk about in later at 11:30. That created a lot of anxiety for those people because you have entire families not living in those cramped spaces, and they cannot really go out and so on and so on. And but it's interesting that you say like now people, it's not so it seems not to be an economic part, like people don't buy masks because it's for a whole family is maybe too expensive and so on. That is not a point so much because they reuse them also and so on, right? They use more.
Yeah, there's a lot of reuse and things like that. I mean, there's an ideological distinction. Sometimes people refuse to wear masks on ideological grounds in the U.S. You know, but that's not as much in New York City as it is elsewhere.
So whether there kind of conflicts, how are the kind of community, the dynamics within the community, because we know, I mean, it's really like the United Nations, right? It's really basically people from all over the place, right? And of course, it's a kind of sensitive kind of equilibrium, but also often we see that actually it doesn't mean at all that there is more racism. Actually, racism sometimes more in those places that are very very homogenous, right? Because everyone is different immediately. But how did in this kind of crisis situation, how did that work? Did the dynamic was a lot of racial tensions, or is that not so much?
I wouldn't say so much. I mean, I think you know, New York it's a complicated place, but people, you know, especially in Queens, you really have to figure out how to deal with each other just as the price of doing business every day in this society. And I think that has a tempering effect on people, that kind of constant encountering of one another across lines of difference, and the need to actually figure out how to get along in the streets and the shops and things like that. People work these things out in that kind of rough way that New Yorkers do, right? That kind of crude, rough, textured, working things out on the street that we're good at in New York. That's actually what we excel at. We may do other things really poorly, but we do that well. You know, and so I think that's New York. It's when you get into places where there's less diversity and less encountering people across lines of difference, that you start to get into territories that are more reactionary, racist, maybe more explicitly racist, if you will. You know, there's been a lot of animosity in some parts of the country against Chinese communities because everyone thinks it's a Chinese virus, you know, which is of course an absurd concept, right? The idea that viruses have nationalities is the most ridiculous thing you can imagine, but there are people in the US who for some reason or another feel that way. And so they've targeted people in Chinese communities for abuse. And that's, you know, these are the kinds of things we have to be very, very cautious about. Yeah.
That you didn't see so much around this area because I mean Flushing and Amos and so on. People have learned to live together anyway, right? So
yeah, and you know, I mean, it's, you know, Flushing in fact is a really interesting case in point because you know, they did not suffer as much in the coronavirus as Corona or Jackson Heights or Elmhurst, largely because they had experience with the pandemics, right? And they knew what to do, and they started doing it much earlier than other people around. And there's already a robust culture of mask wearing anyway there. So I mean, you know, we've had to learn from Flushing basically, you know, how to do this, all right? So yeah.
So Flushing is basically the stop, several stops after Corona Plaza. No? I don't know how many.
Yeah, and it's the last stop on the 7 train.
So it's basically when you arrive there, then you have almost the feeling you're in Hong Kong, right? So
yeah, I mean that's it. Yeah, yeah.
Maybe also because the airport is also quite close, right? It's
right.
It might have been in the past. We studied, for example, in Hong Kong also often To Kwa Wan and East Kowloon. There are some areas also with a lot of, for example, people from Thailand, and but that was also very close to Kai Tak Airport. So many people would, if you speak probably English and you are a migrant and so on, it's a good place. You can have a business and make something, right? Because there's always like some form of jobs. People come, they need people with languages and so on, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So the World Fair area and the airport might have been also important drivers of that particular.
Definitely, there's no question. Yeah, very important.
Yeah.
2 airports. I mean, LaGuardia on one side and JFK on the other. They're both in Queens, and we're sort of between them, right? So they're important. Yeah.
So where people also arrive, right? Or to cater for those that arrive, right? Because that's usually also how you...
Exactly.
Okay, I think it's getting late over there. And
you do one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe not very relevant to the corona, but I want to ask: it's illegal to separate the room into separate the house into many rooms in Corona Plaza this year, right?
Yeah, so a very good question. So anything that you do to the interior of a house is regulated by New York City Building Code. So you have to, your house has to be compliant with the code. And anytime you want to make a change, you have to apply to the building department and have it approved and make sure it's to code. What happens in Corona is that people just do it anyway, and they do it illegally. Right, so they divide up, and it's against the law, but they do it anyway. And because New York City has, I mean, you can't check every house in the city. There's just too many people, so they get away with it, you know. And the people who live in those apartments don't tell often because they don't want to be kicked out. Right, they're renters, so it's a precarious situation for them. Right. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, because I think New York probably implemented those rules also because it has a long history of those kind of abuses, right? Because
exactly,
it has basically 150 years of immigrant stories of people coming in with nothing and people making money out of those, right? So
that's right.
Are many of those people actually undocumented?
Many are, yeah, many are. Corona has one of the highest numbers or percentages of undocumented people in the city. and that's another reason why people are in a situation of precarity, because they're undocumented, so they're afraid of making complaints about their landlords or things like that, because they don't want to be deported, and that's understandable. So they're in very vulnerable situations.
Particularly with health also, right? Because they don't have health insurance and
exactly. Yeah. Right. Which is terrible. Of course, it's terrible. Okay.
Was fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this.
It was very nice to meet everybody. Yeah.
So
you guys feel free to email me if you need anything.
Don't say it too loud. They will do that.
That's fine.
Yeah. Thanks for your generosity and fantastic that we can catch up in this way and in this kind of very special moment also. As I say, we have recorded this. We later might make a little kind of video of the whole experience.
Okay.
And maybe we might send you. And I hope through Miodrag also and so on, we stay in contact. And of course, you're always invited.
I'm sure we will. Yeah.
Or if you want to have us delivering similar experience to your students, like either by ourselves or by our network, we are more than happy to reciprocate. I
think that'd be very fun, actually. Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah. That's, with Zoom, it's actually a great thing to do. And what Saturday is morning is the final review.
Okay.
I think you might do other things and so on. I'm just saying, like, if you want to be, or if you have the time, you could join us.
Yeah. Send me the information so I know when it is and everything. Yeah.
It's just two groups there. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.